Had we balanced the budget in a responsible way, without gimmicks, without one-time credit card fixes, without borrowing billions from our schools, I would argue Minnesota would be a lot better off today. And we certainly wouldn't be facing a $4+ billion budget deficit when we come back in 2013. I think it's important that we think about that right now because Republicans have essentially, with the budget that they passed to end the shutdown last July, guaranteed that we're going to be facing exactly the same choices next year that we faced this budget, this biennium. With that deficit, we'll have to decide whether we do the same things the Republicans chose to do, which is borrow from our kids, raise property taxes all across the state, and protect special interests, or whether we choose differently and pass a budget that would actually truly solve our deficit problems and strengthen middle-class families instead of continuing to nickel and dime them. We really should choose differently. The Republican leadership appears to be really proud, apparently, of their fiscal discipline and responsibility. The reality is that their budget did nothing did nothing for the current biennium to put the budget in the position it is this current biennium, but their willingness to borrow and steal from our kids has everything to do with the $4 billion budget deficit that we're going to be facing next year. And I think that their really kind of giddiness over this budget forecast should alarm Minnesotans about how they're going to handle the problems if they are in charge again next year. We need some fiscal responsibility, real fiscal responsibility. We don't need continued credit card borrowing and massive borrowing from our schools to balance the budget. We ought to get after it in a real and a responsible way, and that's what we want to do. And I guess the last thing I would say is we've reduced a bunch of bills to reduce property taxes. We've introduced several bills to get people back to work in this state. We've introduced bills to make sure that we can address this foreclosure problem, getting after these middle-class basic bread and butter issues, and we need to be focused on those things as we kind of move toward the end of this session, and I hope the Republicans will join us in doing that. I think the governor is exactly right. Let's get those jobs bills done moving forward, and then we can actually say we've accomplished something. Tom.
Well, a little bit of good news, small amount of revenue, but the bigger story, I think, is as it relates to starting to pay back schools. And I guess maybe once you become a grandparent, you become more concerned about schools. And I think about it more than I ever have in my life. But I think what we all need to remember and be cautious about is even after this $300 million is paid back to schools, we still owe our K-12 system, because of the Republican budget last year, $2.4 billion. I mean, the next $2.4 billion of new revenue that comes in law, is committed to schools. So before people in the business community get too excited about, oh gosh, there's some money to bring down our property taxes, they just need to remember we owe our schools still an additional $2.4 billion. Now, and that's caused me a great deal of concern because remember last year's budget was paid for by delaying payments to schools. And I just looked at a sheet the other day that indicated that right as of February 20th or so, K-12 schools have borrowed $600 million because the state hasn't been living up to its obligation to pay out the aid that we owe them. So this is all tempered a little bit by the fact that we really shifted our budget problem over onto our K-12 system. They've borrowed $600 million. Now, fortunately, we're going to be able to give them $300 million of it back, but they're still holding $300 million in loans out there as a result of the shift that happened last year. So it's good that we're started down that road, but people should be just a word of caution about how far we still have to go. And I want to add my congratulations to the governor for remembering back a year ago his very first act as governor when he did the executive order for early enrollment into MA. You know, it's the Health and Human Service side of this budget where most of the savings is. $230 million of the savings is spending cuts, less spending. 180 of that is in the Health and Human Service area. I mean, the administration is doing a very good job. The early enrollment in MA is producing tremendous savings for the state of Minnesota on our Health and Human Service budget, and the governor really deserves credit for that. That really was the first act, I think, that most of us remember him taking when he became governor. So just cautious, but waiting for the jobs plan. I share that with the governor. I got a lot of friends that aren't working in the construction trades, and the sooner we get this bonding bill teed up and passed, the sooner we can get shovels in the ground this spring and put Minnesotans back to work. So I'm glad that the current bonding level held because of the forecast. So we've still got the capacity to do the $775 million of bonding that the governor proposed. I would urge the Republicans, let's get to it. Let's start having some hearings in that bonding committee. Let's give some hope to Minnesota employers that employ construction workers that they can get to work this year, that we don't have to wait and lose an entire construction season.
Senator Bakk, Senator Senjem called upon you and Representative Thissen by name and said he wanted you to help him in a capacity to actually do something for the state. What would you interpret that as?
I don't have a clue what that means. There'll be Democratic votes for a bonding bill. Get one on the floor. I know clearly that's a bipartisan vote. One will be required. We're willing to do heavy lifting on a bonding bill, and I guess that's where I would reach out to him. He's the chair of the committee. Let's get it on the floor and get it passed and get it on the governor's desk.
Are there any other must-haves besides the bonding bill that should get done this session, knowing that there's a lot of folks in both your caucus and in the Republican caucus who want to get home and start campaigning, getting to know their new districts?
We need to, in addition to the bonding bill, we have, the governor and we have several jobs bills that we think would start getting people back to work. And I think our members do want to get back to their districts, but they also want to get their work done here. And our first responsibility is actually doing right by the people of Minnesota and middle-class Minnesotans, and that includes getting those jobs bills passed. We'd also like to see some action on those foreclosure bills. And if there's a way that we can think about starting to even accelerate the payback of the school shift, that would be terrific.
Obviously, the governor's talking about the jobs bill, including the Vikings stadium. Do you see that as a priority that needs to get done?
Well, I guess I've publicly said it. I mean, every day that slips away makes it that much harder to ever get a Vikings bill on the governor's desk. Remember, it has to go through multiple committees, and there are going to be hours and hours and hours of testimony in every committee. So as the days slip away and a bill doesn't get introduced, the multiple committees it has to go through, I think it gets more and more difficult. I believe as a result of today and not having an additional deficit to have to balance, there is 5 weeks left before Easter. There is no reason that we can't get the governor's jobs plan in front of these committees, and I don't believe one of the bills has had a hearing yet. There is no reason that those bills can't get heard, get passed to the governor's desk, a bonding bill, plenty of time. This session can easily end before Easter if people start rolling up their sleeves on what's important to Minnesotans.
Okay.
Do you see early session end too, Mr. Minority Leader? In the House, you were slightly more reluctant than your colleagues in the Senate, I think, to say you need to end early.
Well, I think, again, more importantly than the date that we end on is getting our work done for the people of Minnesota, and that work includes doing things that everything that we can to make sure Minnesotans in a position to get middle-class families back to work. That's our priority, and so instead of kind of focusing on what this end date ought to be, let's get our work done. And I think if we actually start working on that right now, we absolutely can end it in 5 weeks from now. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.